Who the fuck had the idea of making a 2025 Snow White? Why did they make a 2025 version of Snow White? Who in their right mind in the Disney Pixar studio would think that that would be a good idea to remake Snow White after the over 100 iterations through history of Snow White and do it now in 2025 when all of the political, economic, social mores, everything has changed since the time it was written, since the time it came out on film, and to today. And so you'd think, oh, there's a new Snow White 2025 and it's live action. That's going to be so much better than the 1937 Disney movie that was hand drawn every frame by frame by artists. We need to kind of take a look at the extraordinary effort that went in to making Disney Snow White in 1937 at the time. So I want to take you on this journey of comparing the three different iterations of Snow White that are the most popular, but I'm going to focus today on first the original text from the Grimm's brothers from 1812, then the 1937 iteration that was done by Disney, first animated feature ever made. And then I'll look at Mark Webb's 2025 version, which is a mixture of live action characters with a ton of CGI. Let's start with the beginning. The Grimm's brothers. You're talking about 1812 Germany, right? This is a time of superstition and folklore and stories telling and families and fear and trouble, and that you might get there. You are living under a ruling monarchy with a king and a queen and a princess that is patriarchally defined through time. And it usually the power goes to the man. But when in this story, which makes it interesting, is the power goes to Snow White, but the evil stepmother decides once she sends the father off to be killed,
It was almost too easy for me to have him killed.
she's going to be the queen. And she's happy with that until she goes to her magic mirror and she says,
Who is the fairest of them all?
the magic mirror says, not you, baby, it's Snow White. How are these three iterations of Snow White the same? How are they different? What does it matter if they're the same or different? How do we find meaning in comparing them? So I think it's interesting to see. And so we need to look at, like, how did this little 7-year-old Snow White girl end up in a movie in 2025? And that's why it's important to look back and see how she started and why did they change her and what those changes mean. What worked so well in the 1937 version is that even though the animation seems so unlike what actual people look like, we don't care. We don't have to have a live person in a movie to be able to have spectator identification with a character. You cannot compare Snow White to the real world. That is not an interesting comparison because nobody cares. We care about the story. What's going on in the story? Does it end the way we want it to? Are the animals evil or are they not? So as we go through the story, we see how the changes that have been made in the 2025 version has taken every bit of fun, joy, laughter, and silliness out of the film. It takes itself way too seriously, as if they're talking about the United Nations or something, when it's just the 7-year-old girl with an apple in the forest. And to me, it's too much. And here's an image. You can see On the left is the 1937 rendition of Snow White, and on the right is the live action of Rachel Zegler playing Snow White as a real person. Now, although she's pretty and was great for the role for 2025, there is something really sympathetic about the image from 1937 that does not exist in that image of the 2025, even though she's a real person. So a lot of people get confused and think, oh, if it's real people, I'll like the movie more because I'm a real person. But actually, that's totally ridiculous because, you know, think of all the movies that you've watched that are animated or have, you know, all Marvel, all DC people flying, have powers. Like, we just buy into what we sit down and we buy into whatever the movie's going to show us, right? And what it's showing us here is that there's a joy and a happiness and laughter that exists in this 1937 version that has been completely erased in the 1925, which is really dark, which is really dismal, which is, there's no joy. The only joy in the film is the very beginning of the film when she's with her family that's all together, which doesn't exist in any of the two films. So 2025 starts out where the family's together, the mother, the father, and the daughter. And then it says, oh, the wife died, the queen died, gets remarried. Here comes Gal Gadot, who we all know, and she's beautiful, and she's the evil stepmother. We totally get it. She's wearing almost the same outfit. And I gotta tell you, if I'm looking at these two images of the queen, I am more scared of the animated one than I am of Gal Gadot dressed up like an evil queen. I think almost everyone would agree with that, even though she's animated. Here's the image of how the 2025 version starts with the family intact. The mother, the father, and the daughter are together. One of the main themes of many, many movies in America with what's called the reunification of the family. That the beginning starts out, the family's together, there's a conflict, family gets spread apart, and then there's the end where everyone finds each other again and they reunite as a family, okay? That's a trope of narrative that's used over and over. What happens here is totally different. You have this whole family set up, and the queen, her mother dies, her dad is sent to war, but really is being killed by the evil stepmother.
I knew he was a fool.
And she's left to be a maid in 2025. She's a maid in the queen's castle, rather than just singing in the woods like she is in 1937. Again, 1937, she's singing, she's free, she's dancing through the flowers and the birds. Take that idea and compare it to 2025, where she's wearing maid's clothes and cleaning a completely clean castle that's already clean. And what's interesting is that's the first time in the 2025 version that she meets the so-called prince, who is not a prince in the 2025 version. They have totally changed the character. His name is Jonathan. He is a Robin Hood-like character with a gang of followers who play instruments, and he's stealing food from the queen to give it to the poor, and Snow White is cleaning the kitchen, and they run into each other, and that's their first meeting. So clearly the 2025 filmmakers knew that you cannot in 2025 get by with a film where two people have never met and there's a kiss and they live happily ever after. We have gotten so far beyond that it doesn't work anymore. So they tried to make it work in Snow White, but it shouldn't work in Snow White. I think that they were trying to make a feminist version of Snow White that falls flat on its face, because there's nothing in the movie that makes us think that this 14-year-old girl can run an entire town. I mean, it's just ridiculous, really. that she's singing and all happy about being married with there's no realization of what marriage is. There's no context about the marriage. It's like they're just wearing white, like, and that means they're married. So I feel like it's just glossing over issues that were controversial in 1937 or before and trying to make them updated. But in fact, what happens is we're like, why are we seeing this Jonathan guy 4 times in the film? Like, we want there to be a prince. Every girl fantasizes. That's why these movies work. Every little girl fantasizes when they're young that there's going to be some gorgeous guy who's a prince and has money and is just going to sweep you off your feet, put you on the white horse, and take you to your castle. I mean, that is a fantasy that a lot of little girls have. Who needs Jonathan? Nobody's fantasizing about Jonathan. Nobody. If you had cast Jonathan with Christian Bale. So who's new? Who's hot that's new? Channing Tatum. If you had Channing Tatum in the 2025 version, be the Jonathan character who she meets, we as the audience who are identifying with Snow White, we will then identify with her desires. We will identify with her wanting Channing Tatum. Each time she meets him, she wants him. And then she gets him at the end. But they don't do that. Instead, they take out all the sexual tension or even romance tension, and it's just like they're friends and they don't even know about marriage and nobody talks about it. And then all of a sudden they're all in white at the end and they're married. In the end, the most important thing is not to say, did I like this movie? Instead, the question is, what is this movie really about? That's the question I ask myself every time I see a movie. I never ask myself, do I like it or do I not like it? That means nothing. It has no meaning at all. Why do you like it? Why do you not like it? Give specific reasons. You have them in your head because you just came to the conclusion on your own while you were watching it that you don't like it. Something had to give you that feeling. What was it that gave you that feeling? Okay, so we're done. You've seen commentary on all 3 iterations of Snow White, and we've come to the conclusion that the 1937 version is the best film out of the 3 stories. And I want to hear, do you think they should have made a Snow White in 2025 by changing the character's, race, by changing the story, by changing the ending? Why not just make a Latino coming-of-age story? And think about it. This movie cost $209 million to make. There are people starving in this country, and it only brought in $1.4 million. That's a lot of money, and because of it, Hollywood changed its mind about doing a live-action version of Tangled. Thank you. I forgot to tell you 2 very important points. First of all, I want to point out that it is not by accident that it's an apple that is in all 3 iterations of Snow White, and it's the fact that Snow White has to bite the apple in order to be poisoned in all of the different iterations. So, what's the apple all about? The apple comes from, guess what? The book of Genesis. Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, and Eve is seduced by the snake, really phallic, and she takes a bite of the apple, and God is so upset, he punishes both Adam and Eve by throwing them out of the Garden of Eden into the real world where things aren't perfect and there's disagreement and there's war and sickness and disease. Snow White is also, in a way, biting into the apple of knowledge because she's learning that not all people are nice, like her and the dwarves. But when she bites into the apple, she is put into a long sleep. It's more like a coma. But we have to think about, what does that mean? If she is in a coma, she can't talk, she can't fall in love with the prince. All she's doing is laying there. She's totally passive, which makes the prince totally active, which is a trope in literature and film where mostly men are active. And so we realize that this bite of the apple is more meaningful than it just happens to be an apple. It's really bringing into focus the punishment of women, which God punished women with a painful childbirth. Didn't punish Adam at all. Adam gets all the power. This is the beginning of the patriarchal infrastructure of Western society, and it starts with Eve biting the apple of knowledge, and the whole deal in the patriarchy is that women are not supposed to have access to knowledge. That's why we couldn't even go to higher education in the United States until the 70s women's movement. Believe that or not, women couldn't get credit cards, they couldn't buy cars, they couldn't buy houses because they were all stay-at-home moms, and in order to buy anything, you needed your husband to sign. So the apple is really representative of all the things that women desire and want that is cut off for them through that apple, which is what happens in Snow White. And then it turns into she gets kissed by the prince who brings her to life. And then we have a happily ever after where the prince, in some versions, takes her on his white horse to his castle. Even though the 2025 was trying to disrupt all these tropes about race, gender, power, sexuality, by the end of the film, in every single film, Snow White's married. Gets married at the end. 2025 is trying to update it. You cannot update a film if you have a woman getting married at the end of the film. Here's why. If you look at all the films ever made, 96% of all feature films were made by men. It was true in 1900, and it's true in 2025 that 96% of all filmmakers are men. It is through the white male perspective of what a woman would do, what dwarf might look like. It's all coming from a human male mind. It is not the real world. It's not true. And the patriarchal culture also comes from men writing that men are in charge. So when we look at movies, there's very few movies. I mean, you can count them on two hands where a woman at the end of the film doesn't either get married, die, or go to prison. Those are the three endings for women, and that's it. And so Snow White 2025 did not disrupt any patriarchal culture, and it is not a feminist movie. And please come and see more on my YouTube channel.